start with the problem. Start with a problem statement, because actually doing that, the sunlight of that clarity can shrivel up some of this slightly intellectually fascinating stuff, but doesn't actually take us anywhere. The innovation and the horsepower you can bring, how do we apply that to make our operation, our people happier, our customers happier, patients happier, or whatever, deliver a better service?
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is Jeremy Butler, Chief Executive Officer, King Edward VII Hospital, one of London's most prestigious independent hospitals with a long history of providing exceptional care and supporting veterans through its charitable mission. Jeremy's career spans senior leadership roles at Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust, KPMG, and PwC. He brings deep expertise in transformation, operational improvement, and commercial development. Since taking up the role in 2025, Jeremy has been steering the hospital through a period of strategic renewal, building on its reputation for clinical excellence while strengthening its charitable commitments. It's now entering into a new phase, having recently agreed to be acquired by the UK-based care provider Bupa. Jeremy, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Thanks, Belden. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. So King Edward VII's Hospital, if anybody knows it, they know it's got a huge history, a unique reputation, and plays a sort of interesting role in UK public life. But can you give us a picture of where it is today in terms of size, services, staff, and the patients you care for?
Yes. So King Edward VII has been running for 126 years, founded in 1899, initially to look after returning soldiers from the Crimea War. And it was founded by Agnes Keyser, who was a girlfriend of the king at the time. And what it's become today is a 56-bedded hospital in central London, just off Marylebone High Street, part of the Harley Street Health District on Beaumont Street, but also having a fantastic cutting-edge outpatient centre opposite the medical centre, and then an admin building. So we've got this 56-bedded unit with theatres. We've got 4 theatres. We've got MRIs, CT scanners, very good equipment, and nursing staff that even this morning I had a commendation come in for the nursing care that we give here. So we've developed this kind of slightly boutique where we're a charitable institution. We do deliver subsidised care for veterans, but we also operate as a private hospital. And we have private insurers that point their patients here, but also a self-pay offering. We've also had quite a nice legacy of dealing with the royal family. We were the Queen Mother's favourite hospital. The Queen and Prince Philip have also been treated here. And that has been part of the makeup of the hospital. But moving forward, it's really looking strategically to run as an independent charitable institution in central London. The cost of running a hospital becomes higher and higher. The governance requirements become higher. Technology is expensive. And to rely on philanthropic funding really isn't sustainable for the long term. So we've got about 320 odd staff. We have another several hundred bank of consultants that have practicing privileges here. We don't employ them. They are invited or approved to work here. That clinical caliber quite high. So that's what we are today as a setup on Beaumont Street.
And how do you see any of that possibly changing as a result of the acquisition, and what in your thinking, must stay the same?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of what must stay the same is the ethos. We have this wonderful legacy brand equity in the standing of the organization. We have that ethos and history and brand equity, which is wonderful, and that's part of the presence and the gravitas of the organization. What has to change really is the level of activity. So we've been operating too quietly for the amount of capacity that we've had, and we've been running below capacity. The clinical services footprint that we have will stay the same for now. So we're doing a lot of orthopedics, gynecology, ear, nose and throat, urology, dermatology, plastics. These would be our kind of main areas today. Over time, I would expect that to grow. So at the moment, we don't get into things like oncology. We don't have interventional radiology. We don't do cardiology. I'm not saying that we'll definitely do that, but these are areas to look at because the idea is to be responsive to the market. And our clinical services strategy is something that one of the first things that we'll be sitting down with the Bupa family and working out, because they also have the Cromwell Hospital in West London and the new Victoria Hospital they've just acquired in South West London. So the interesting piece will be how we look at these three hospitals in the round for London.
It sounds like it could give you opportunities to specialize even further.
Yes, and the self-pay market is really interesting, where we have this brand that is quite powerful. That runs overseas. So we have people that will travel pointedly to come and have their care here. So that's something that we want to grow as well and make sure that we can market smartly in order to capture that and grow that.
How does the charitable side work? Because very understandably, you're sort of describing a lot of it in terms of markets and capacity and utilization. But how does the charitable side fit into that whole equation?
So there's two answers to that. One is historically and one is going forward. Historically, the charitable institution, it's a charity that has operated via a hospital. Going forward, the charity continues, but the asset it's been running as a hospital has been sold to Bupa. So the charity will continue. The charity will use the funds raised from the sale of the hospital asset in order to expand its care for veterans. So it will not have the onus of running a hospital, which actually is part of the purpose of this transaction, is to liberate the charity from that, because there's a lot to do. There's a lot of investment required and a lot of governance and risk management around that and operational day-to-day working. But going forward, the charity will be providing funds to subsidize treatment for veterans. And we at this hospital would still be doing that treatment. Others might also do that treatment. So we will have a best friends. It won't be a hardwired relationship, but it will be a best friends relationship. Obviously, we're in negotiations still with the Charities Commission, but the charity's name will be a version of King Edward VII Sister Agnes Charity is the working title. And the hospital will continue as King Edward VII, but as part of the Bupa family. And that branding is TBC. But the brand will continue here. That's quite important. And the brand of the charity will continue, but they won't be connected formally.
So you used a word in there, which is purpose. And I know you were more talking about the purpose of the transaction, but I'm going to hijack it anyway. What has been the purpose of King Edward VII's hospital? And then how do you see that going forward? Does it stay the same? Does it evolve?
Well, the purpose has been a blend of charitable intent and private hospital or independent hospital is the best way to put it, operating with a charitable ethos. And there aren't many left. There's ourselves and there's one in northwest London. We're the only one in central London. There's two answers. Again, there's the purpose of the hospital, the purpose of the charity. So the hospital, I would argue, the kind of jewel in the crown of Bupa's hospitals. I mean, I would say that, given the equity and the legacy and the perception of our hospital. And then the purpose of the charity will be to make sure that veterans benefit from funding and are able to get access to treatment accelerated or subsidized in some way.
Yeah. Do you know how that purpose came about?
Originally?
Yeah.
Originally, it was Agnes Keyser providing treatment in her rooms within the West End, not very far from here. Funnily enough, it was philanthropy that set it up. It was a group of businessmen that provided the funds in order for her to provide this rudimentary care facility. And if you look at the original deeds of the hospital, and it says St Agnes's Hospital for Officers and Gentlemen. So that purpose originally was to care for officers. This is obviously pre the formation of the NHS. About 50 years before that, pretty much 49 years to be exact. It was to provide care in a very specific way for a community. But over time, that has grown into a broader offering where insurers wish to find access to independent hospitals, and King Edward VII Hospital has been a hospital that has provided that service.
So having a look a bit more at the kind of transformation that I think you've been leading the hospital through during the time you've been there. You've led transformations both in the NHS and in the private sector. What do you see as the commonalities and the differences, both in making change and also in shaping strategy between the two?
Well, You have to go to the kind of essence of what it is that you're seeking to achieve. Get people around the table and go, okay, what are we here to do? How do we know that we're any good at that? How do we do it? How do we measure it? And then what do we do to actually loop back round and improve it? Which is I'm just pinching the improvement cycle Deming methodology from post-war Japan. It's a kind of universal truth. So in order to transform and change, in my opinion, you've got to start with, well, where are we? And what are we here for? What is our purpose? And pause and think about that. So in order to do that, in order to execute that, what do we need to do? And if I were to put a model on that, I would say, what's the vision, which, purpose can be the vision. Therefore, the strategy in order to deliver the vision needs to be X. And then the tactics we have to execute are down in the weeds of execution. And then the final bit is the scorecard against that, or the dashboard, or the metrics, or whatever management jargon you want to use, the KPIs. And then those tell you if you're delivering, and you go back up. In Japan, they call that Hoshin Kanri. They call that goal deployment or strategy deployment. So we have clarity about where we think we're going to go. We understand how that breaks down all the way through the organization. And then crucially, we have the check cycle. Are we actually doing what we said we would do? And then having the humility to tweak that if it's not quite working the way it should. And I think that's really important, because if you think about business planning, and I think about earlier in my career, you'd be in organizations that would write a fantastic business plan. They pop it in the drawer. Well, actually, that should be a living document, because it should be what drives you, and it should reflect events and all the rest of it. And there are various tools out there, whether it's SWOT or PEST or PESTLE. If you do this work correctly, your antennae are up. You adapt accordingly, whether it's legislative or whatever.
So one of the things I'd love to probe a little bit more on there is patient safety, quality of care, right at the heart of what you're doing. How do you modernize operations? How do you drive efficiency without endangering that? And I realize the question itself makes it sound like there's a tension, and maybe there's not. But
yeah. It's a great question, because we all know you can just throw resources at something because it's cheap or it's easy. And one of my first trips to China, I visited clients of the organization I was working for, and potential clients, because I have a background in that space. I would look at their shop floors out of curiosity. And it always amused me that they would throw resource at something and the people would almost get in the way. But because they were cheap, they thought they could just put manpower on something to make it work. Now, the flip of that is, if manpower is an asset you have to think about the cost of that, then the impact it has, the value it delivers, which is where I like to be. You've got to think about what's the value of what's happening in the interaction. And if you're clear about what it is you're seeking to achieve, you can be clear about how you set up to do that. The crude analogy would be, you could have 2 or 3 nurses checking on the same person in a side room, but that's actually going to get in the way, because you won't have continuity of knowledge and care. And it's almost, if I can torture the analogy of like account management almost, you could have one person that understands the breadth of what is going on. You could argue we should have 3 people or 5 people, but actually what gives us the efficacy? And the efficacy is that there is clarity of things like role. So clarity of role, clarity of accountability and authority in order to execute your job. So to bring it back to that care and that clinical excellence on the shop floor, and if I could actually bottle the DNA of the nursing care, I'll be taking that and licensing it out into the wider world. And what that actually comes down to is 2 elements for me, really. You've got the human. So the human brings an emotional context to it where they care and they want to do the right thing. And then the wraparound, which is slightly duller, really, is the mechanics of how the job works. So clarity about what you're doing and clarity about the duties and the tasks in the job. But it is a 2-sided thing. There's a big human piece to it. And you let the human do what they've got to do, but there's clarity about the purpose of that work. That makes sense.
Jeremy, one of the things that strikes me listening to what you're talking about there, well, a couple of things. One is there's a big chunk of what you're talking about there that I might describe as management, defining roles, making sure people know what they need to do, even though you haven't mentioned it, making sure they've got the tools and the information and all the rest of that, and seeing how it's going. Taking some sort of action if it's going well or if it's not going well. And I've seen in actually probably most organizations that management's kind of this bad word. We don't do that. Management's bad. We do leadership, which is great. Leadership's very important. I'm not, but sometimes all the clarity and almost sort of the structure, the certainty of this is what I'm here to do. I know what I need to do. I can do it. I've demonstrated. We've measured. I've actually done it. That I think often gets lost. And in a lot of organizations, what gets lost with it, I think, is accountability.
Yes, I completely agree. And you can turn this around because it is kind to be clear about what the job is for somebody, and kind to be clear about what great looks like, okay looks like, and not good looks like. An analogy I use is there are tram lines. Within these tram lines, you can bob around and you'll be kind of okay, you'll be great, you'll be moving around, but you broadly are delivering. And then above this tram line, you're smashing it. But below this line, it's not working. And we're going to have a conversation. We're going to have to bring you on track and help you. And that could be training. It could be expectation setting or whatever. And the way I think about it, and this is I think about earlier in my career, if I know what it is I've got to do and I can do that and then I can surpass it, I can argue for a pay rise. I can argue for more responsibility. I can argue for a promotion in some form. And I can point at what I've been doing. And this is what you've asked of me. And this is what I've delivered against it. And I've then surpassed in this model, in this way of working. So the management, I think, sets all of the mechanics and the ground rules and the expectations and enables the employee to be the best they can be. And then I think the leadership part is seeing where people are moving, going above and beyond, or they're checked out maybe, and having that ability to sense check, take the temperature of what's going on the shop floor and be able to then liberate them in some way, or we haven't got a round peg in a round hole here. So what do we do about that? And there's a great expression I like, which is, the blame is always in the process, not in the person. So if that person isn't performing, we haven't hired correctly, we haven't trained them correctly, we haven't set the expectation correctly. When you exhaust all of that, eventually you might come to the fact that this person, for whatever reason, simply isn't going to do what they need to do. And actually, it's again a process thing. Then we need to help them find a role that will suit them, which may or may not be within the organization. But if you've set the expectation properly, then that's okay. That conversation can be had. And I think leadership is very much about the tone and the direction and the overarching piece, whether it's a shepherd leading from the back or someone heading up the mountain saying, follow me. It kind of doesn't matter. There's different forms of leadership. But the management is the mechanics so that people come to work with all the hygiene factors taken care of. And they aren't in the dark, and they know they're supported to do their job.
I like that connection you're drawing, which I think often gets overlooked, between kindness, actually caring for people, sort of almost like a certain humility as a manager to say, look, if they're not performing, it's actually on me. I didn't set it up.
I completely agree. I don't have all the answers. I absolutely don't have all the answers. What I can do is help people get to the right answer. And we can ask great questions in order to get there, but not know the answer. In fact, there was a writer called Montaigne, and I think it was in the 17th century in France. And Montaigne wrote about the school of I don't know. So you can posit something, but you could also say that could all be completely wrong, deliberately undercutting what you've just said. You're allowing people to come in and go, yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. That's fine. Again, with character and personality, which becomes quite important in leadership, people can get carried away. But I want to give people the opportunity to say, actually, Jeremy, I'm not sure I agree with that. So how you set that scene is quite important. And that will be a function of you as a person. It's not a mechanistic managerial thing. You've got to articulate that the way that works for you as a person. We're all different characters. I think you've got to read the room as well. And you've got to look at someone who's pensive and say, what do you think? Because I'm not sure, actually. Do you think that's got legs or not?
You're sort of creating the space, giving the permission for people to say things that maybe they themselves aren't even sure is right, but it's worth thinking about.
I'll give you a quick story. Years ago, I was running a business, and the local MP wanted to visit because there was an election coming up. And I just hired this guy to run operations. He was really good, but he hadn't been in very long, maybe 2 weeks. And this MP came in, and there was people in tow or whatever. And he turned around to this operation guy and he said, what's the single biggest thing that keeps you awake at night? And the answer that came out of his mouth was not the answer I expected to hear. And I've never forgotten that. And there were a few lessons for me. One, the pointed question. It's a closed question. It strikes to the heart of what might be concerning somebody. But then me, as the actual guy who's there day to day, if I'm doing my job, I kind of should know that. Now, I was a lot younger and all the rest of it, but it's never left me. The chap that I'd hired, this guy, when he came in, one of the first things he did, there was a meeting and I sat at the back. I said, I won't say anything. It was his meeting. But he got everybody to download everything that they thought was an issue. So I think it was about a 4-hour meeting. And he captured it all. He said, it's fine. It doesn't matter what it is. Let's just get it down. And then, of course, you systematically start to prioritize, think about resources, think about impacts, and now you've got a plan. But you can't get people to volunteer that unless you've built that safety for them.
You've used the word safety a couple of times. If you don't mind, I'm going to throw the word trust in any kind of medical care situation, both with staff and with patients. How do you go about maintaining and building trust? Particularly, I can imagine right now there might be people thinking, what does all this mean for us? How do you address that?
Yeah, great question. So for me, trust is about being consistent and delivering on what you say. If you are inconsistent, it is the most nerve-wracking thing for anybody. It's nerve-wracking for me if I'm dealing with somebody, a trustee or whatever. Any inconsistency is deeply, deeply unnerving. So I think you have to be consistent. And another piece to that is I will ask people, what works well around here? What's getting in the way and what's missing? I start with what's working because I want to start on a positive note. But what's missing and what's getting in the way? Getting in the way is tangible. Missing is less tangible. And often it's the flip of the same item, but it can be articulated differently. So what's getting in the way? A toxic culture. What's missing? A positive culture. It depends how you choose to frame it. You can identify what I would call some hygiene factors or whatever, some basic things, and you can sort them out without an agenda for you, because that then builds trust. Because if this person isn't just kind of work harder, do more hours, take a pay cut, whatever, if they actually are bothered about me as a human doing my job, they're kind of probably okay. And therefore, I'm probably going to open up slightly, because going back to the thing about what's getting in the way around here, people aren't going to volunteer bad stuff if they think you might use that information poorly or throw them under the bus in some way. And then another point I've got to throw into the mix is spam breaking. Because if you have a management structure and you bypass 1 or 2 layers of management and go to somebody and go, well, tell me what's going on around here, tell me what isn't working, and their boss knew that and hasn't done anything about it, they might be putting their boss in a bad light. I don't want to do that. So there's a real dance here. You'll have people on the shop floor absolutely doing the do and being complete heroes in their work, heroes and heroines, I should say. And then you've got the leadership that kind of know what to do and how to get there. I mean, sometimes the management in the middle can be slightly caught in the headlamps, because what they should be doing is being a clear cascade through. So there's clarity about how strategy is deployed and your role in that. And they can feed back up from the shop floor. This is what's going on. This is the mood music, and this is what we should be thinking about. And they've got the antennae, and they're able to do that. That's actually quite a big ask. And not all middle managers are equipped for it. And sometimes we promote people from the shop floor into a middle management role because they're really good at the shop floor job. But we haven't then bothered to train them in, conflict resolution, for example, or negotiation, or structured thinking, or problem solving, to give them the tools to morph into a slightly different job. It's a classic trap that we promote good shop floor people into an embryonic leadership role.
Often they stop their management training, not their leadership training, their management training. And then they wonder why they've got a cadre of middle managers who are struggling.
It's liberating to hire good people. So recent experience of mine, a chief exec I was working for, he said, almost surprised, he said to me, you hire really good people. And I said, well, yeah. I said, that's a general idea. And I said, and selfishly, that makes my life easier. I want someone who wants my job. I want someone nibbling at my heels. And again, this is more Eastern thinking. As you age, your role should be bringing people on and help them to be the best they can be. And you pass on what you know. If you've been around a bit, you know a few things. So pass those on. And if we want to be even better, which we should be, so the aspirational piece, to be even better, you need people who think and they want to be ambitious and go. Recently, somebody here has left to go to a really good person. and they're left to go to this job. And people, oh, that's tragic that they're going. I'm like, well, a couple of things. We couldn't actually offer them the next step in their career. I don't have the role to give that person. So I celebrate him moving off to a bigger and better challenge that absolutely works for him. And it's very important to have good levers and understand what a good lever is. And he's a good lever. He's a good guy. And actually, in his new role, he'll be working with us in a different form with a different organization. And he loves the place. He's really grateful for the way in which he's moved on. And we have a strong relationship. A bad leaver would be somebody that you're quite happy to see go for other reasons. If we can get a few great years out of you and we can give you the challenges and the stimulation and the training and the development, you'll benefit from this, we'll benefit from this. And I would understand we then serve as a platform for you to go and do bigger and greater things. And we can help them. We help them on their journey.
As you say, they become friends just somewhere else. And that's great. One other topic I'd love to explore, I could say it's AI, but let's look at it more broadly. There's just so many opportunities for innovation, whether it's digital health, new facilities, different partnerships, AI, whatever. How do you decide what not to do? Just in the whole space of innovation generally, there's just so much you could pursue.
Yes, it's a great point. For me, when you look at any organization and you've got a plan, a roadmap of what you want to do, and there are issues that over time you expect to address, what are you going to bring to the party to help address those issues? That's where I think where I would want to focus. I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is a spectrum that goes from intellectual fascination to a problem getting in the way. And adopting a innovative approach to something sits somewhere on that scale. And start with a problem. Start with a problem statement. Because actually doing that, the sunlight of that clarity can shrivel up some of this slightly intellectually fascinating stuff, but doesn't actually take us anywhere. The innovation and the horsepower you can bring, how do we apply that to make our operation, our people happier, our customers happier, patients happier, or whatever, deliver a better service? So I would start with the problems, frankly, and then look to apply.
I think that's such a great way to get at it. We've been doing some research on AI, actually how law firms are using it. And one of the big takeaways is you can really spend a lot of time and effort on interesting things. But if you start saying, well, yeah, good, but what are we solving? What's the return? What's the benefit? It cuts through a lot of it and often gets you to much better answers. Sometimes it involves AI, sometimes it don't.
That's right. And to be honest, there's an elegant simplicity to this because it harks back to the question, what is the purpose? What are we here for? And it's an interesting one because I spent some time in the NHS in recent years. And the NHS is a fabulous institution and we are blessed in this country to have it. However, there is a risk of intellectual fascination where people are given budget and roles to go forth and play around with stuff. And that can be wonderful for the individual. It's possible 3M style, you come up with a post-it note concept by the water cooler moment. But my challenge to that is we should be focusing on utilizing capacity better. I mean, kind of the dull stuff, the capacity of what we've got in our infrastructure to get higher throughput of patients, to be addressing errors on the shop floor. And don't get me wrong, that's all going on. But I would perhaps rein in some of that other stuff, or I would give it clear scope to what it's seeking to achieve.
I just want to add one little extra thought to that. Clearly, you and I have in our careers spent a fair amount of time close to or in Japanese kind of manufacturing environments. And I remember on one of my first trips to Japan, like on the factory line, first of all, you could literally eat off the floor. And then second, they're giving me this tour around and there's two people playing around with some bit of kit, on the floor. What are they doing? Oh, they're working on, I don't remember what it was, but basically they were on the shop floor, but working with some new technology. They were trying to figure out how it was going to happen. And it's bringing that future as close to the current issues of today rather than, we've got a team somewhere else and they're off thinking great thoughts, because usually that doesn't get you anywhere.
No, you can go and rent some lovely offices a quarter of a mile away and say, we've got a kind of think team over there. No. put it on the ward or put it on the shop floor and do it there. And yeah, you're right. And the other interesting thing about what you observe there, of course, is that the people closest to the action are the ones that are able to get stuck into it. Your problem solving at the sharp end, really important. These are all the kind of principles that I every day, and the people that I've hired here, because these principles are key to our journey, and they're what make us more impactful. Every week we're becoming stronger in what we do. People have clarity about what they're doing, and that they have a sense of purpose. They know that they can draw on the tools around them, and problems are okay. We are grateful to know the problem because now we can do something about it. They are wonderful opportunities. And then you get the problem-solving mechanisms around that. And that culture, one of openness and transparency and a desire to improve, are what will, they are taking this place to the next level. So, yeah, I'm delighted about that.
Is there anything else you think listeners ought to know, either about the future King Edward VII's Hospital, your vision for it, or just kind of a thought about life or business?
It's all about the people, but supporting the people, and leadership should be articulating the journey, holding a hand out to help people to get there, giving clarity and being kind. And I think a final thought, honesty is kindness. We had somebody here recently, and as part of the exit discussion, I said, may I give you some feedback? So I gave them this feedback, and I subsequently got an email saying, I just want to say thanks for giving me that feedback because I've reflected on it, and thank you. Now, that's not saying Jeremy's great at giving feedback. I don't mean it like that. I just think that that's a tool that we should all think about. And I read an interview with the head of IKEA. At the end of the interview, the journalist said, can you please give me feedback on this interview? Is that you've got to be prepared to be better, because I don't know. And it's Montaigne. Maybe there's a link we can put in about Montaigne. There's something I should dig out of the book that I read years ago. One does not know.
Definitely. Always keeping an open mind to the fact that you might well be wrong.
Yeah. And it's okay.
Yeah. Any feedback for me? Anything I could be doing different?
Belden, you've asked some really good questions. You've steered this really, really well. You listen, and then you pick up on a point, you add something, and that then triggers a further explanation. And I think you're very good at it.
Well, thank you for that. That means a lot. Thank you.
And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share these thoughts, because it's what I believe. I enjoy work. I think Oscar Wilde said work is much more fun than fun.
That takes us into a whole other conversation that I'd love to have about we don't have enough people working, doing stuff they enjoy and doing it well.
Things excite you for a reason. So find out what excites you and do it. And not enough people, I think, have got that congruence between how they feel about themselves, and because we're all different, but we're also all very connected. And if we understand ourselves and what excites us and what gives us passion, and we can channel that into how we spend most of our waking time at work, then work doesn't become work.
Yeah. Well, in some senses, it becomes a part of expressing who you are in the world. That's fabulous. That's what everybody ought to have the opportunity to do.
Yes, absolutely.
This has been, for me, really interesting. Particularly, it's been great to have a chance to hear about sort of where you are right at the pivot.
Yeah.
I want to wish you and King Edward VII's Hospital the best. And I look forward to hearing sort of how it all goes.
Thanks, Belden. My pleasure. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave us a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.